Frank Lucas was born on September 9, 1930, in LaGrange, North Carolina, a small rural town in the segregated South. His parents, Fred Lucas and Mahalie Lucas, were hard-working individuals struggling to make ends meet. Fred worked in the farming industry while Mahalie took care of the household and children. Growing up in the throes of the Great Depression, Lucas experienced extreme poverty, hunger, and violence at an early age. His environment deeply shaped his perception of survival, success, and power. As a child, Frank witnessed frequent acts of racial violence. One pivotal incident involved the murder of his cousin by members of the Ku Klux Klan, a memory that stayed with Lucas forever. This early exposure to violence fueled his growing hatred of the systemic oppression and inequities that African Americans faced. Frank Lucas's formal education was limited as the economic situation forced him to drop out of school at a young age. His family needed money, and Lucas was determined to do whatever it took to provide. Unfortunately, this drive led him to the streets, where he learned the rules of survival in a lawless environment. In his teens, Frank Lucas began his criminal career with petty crimes, stealing food and clothing to support his family. He soon became involved in more severe activities, including mugging and assault. The desperation of his circumstances led him to take increasingly dangerous risks. After a series of local robberies, Lucas realized that rural North Carolina had little to offer in terms of wealth or opportunity. And in the early 1940s, he moved to Harlem, New York, in search of greater fortunes. Bumpy Johnson taught Lucas how to navigate the criminal underworld and introduced him to key figures in organized crime. It was under Johnson's tutelage that Lucas learned the value of loyalty, strategy, and intimidation. This period marked Lucas's introduction to the drug trade, though his role was still small at this stage. He died in 1968, and Lucas seized the opportunity to make his own mark. After Bumpy Johnson's death, Lucas decided to strike out on his own. He recognized that Harlem's drug trade was controlled by the Italian mafia, and he was determined to break their hold. Unlike other drug dealers who purchased drugs from the mafia at inflated prices, Lucas sought to control every aspect of the supply chain. His first move was to go straight to the source of heroin production. In the late 1960s, Lucas traveled to Bangkok, Thailand, and met with a Chinese-Thai businessman named Mr. Ching, who had connections with heroin suppliers in the Golden Triangle, an area known for producing massive quantities of opium and heroin. Lucas's idea was to bypass traditional mafia middlemen and deal directly with the source, ensuring he could sell high-quality heroin at lower prices than his competitors. Lucas's decision to cut out the middlemen would later become one of the defining aspects of his modus operandi. Lucas's heroin operation was vast and well organized. He used military connections, specifically U.S. servicemen returning from the Vietnam War, to smuggle heroin into the United States. It was famously reported that Lucas had heroin hidden inside the coffins of dead American soldiers returning from Vietnam, though this story has been disputed. Whether or not this claim is entirely true, it is evident that Lucas used military planes to transport drugs, a strategy that allowed him to bring in an unprecedented quantity of heroin into the U.S. undetected. Lucas's heroin, known as Blue Magic, was potent and affordable, making it incredibly popular in the streets of Harlem and beyond. At the height of his empire, Lucas claimed to make $1 million a day. His control over the drug trade made him one of the most powerful and feared men in Harlem. He bought expensive properties, luxury cars, and even a large estate in New Jersey, where he lived lavishly while overseeing his operation. Frank Lucas's drug empire was not built on violence alone, though intimidation played a key role. Lucas operated with a business-minded approach, structuring his organization much like a legitimate corporation. His strategy revolved around maintaining control over the entire drug supply chain, from production to distribution. This vertical integration allowed him to sell his product at a competitive price while maintaining high levels of purity. Lucas's main product, Blue Magic, was known for its purity, which set it apart from the heavily diluted heroin that was common at the time. Lucas ensured that his heroin was cut with only the bare minimum of additives, which resulted in a stronger and more addictive product. His ability to offer a high-quality product at a lower price than his competitors quickly won him a large customer base, but it also drew the attention of law enforcement. One of the keys to Lucas's success was his understanding of the logistics behind drug smuggling. using everything from fake passports to bribing customs officials. His connections in the military and with international drug suppliers gave him a level of security that other drug dealers lacked. Lucas was also known for his public persona. Unlike many crime figures who kept a low profile, Lucas flaunted his wealth, attending boxing matches, parties, and social events dressed in custom-made suits and expensive jewelry, as it attracted the attention of law enforcement and journalists. The heroin epidemic that Frank Lucas helped fuel left a trail of destruction in its wake. Throughout the 1970s, heroin addiction rates soared in New York City, particularly in African-American communities like Harlem. The drug destroyed families, careers, and lives, leading to widespread suffering. While Lucas may not have pulled the trigger personally, the violence associated with the heroin trade was rampant. As rival dealers fought for territory, addicts committed crimes to feed their habits, and overdoses became all too common. There were also those who were directly victimized by Lucas's organization: rival drug dealers, individuals who owed money to Lucas, and even former associates who crossed him met with violent ends. Lucas employed enforcers who handled these problems swiftly and without mercy. His rise to power and maintenance of control over the heroin trade required him to use it when necessary. In 1975, Lucas was arrested during a massive raid on his home in New Jersey. The raid, led by Detective Richie Roberts, resulted in the seizure of over $500,000 in cash and marked the beginning of the end for Lucas's drug empire. At his trial, Lucas was convicted of federal drug charges, including conspiracy to distribute heroin and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison, marking a dramatic fall from grace for one of the most powerful crime lords in Harlem's history. While Frank Lucas's initial arrest was a significant blow to his empire, it was what came afterward that truly marked the turning point in his life. Facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars, Lucas made a decision that would shock both law enforcement and the criminal underworld. He agreed to cooperate with the authorities. In a world where loyalty is paramount, Lucas's decision to flip was seen as a betrayal of everything he had built. However, for Lucas, it was a calculated move to secure his freedom. He provided law enforcement with critical information on other major drug traffickers, corrupt law enforcement officials, and the inner workings of the heroin trade. His testimony led to the arrest and conviction of over 100 drug dealers and police officers, many of whom had long evaded justice. One of the most notable aspects of Lucas's cooperation was his decision to work with Richie Roberts, the very detective who had been instrumental in bringing him down. The unlikely partnership between Lucas and Roberts was portrayed in the film American Gangster, and while some aspects were dramatized for Hollywood, the real-life relationship between the two men was significant. Roberts, a man of integrity who refused bribes and stayed committed to the law, saw in Lucas a way to dismantle the corrupt system that allowed the heroin trade to thrive. Following his final release from prison, Frank Lucas attempted to distance himself from the life of crime that had once defined him. Now an older man, Lucas spent his later years reflecting on the choices he had made, the people he had hurt, and the legacy he had left behind. In interviews, Lucas often portrayed himself as a man who had done what he had to do to survive, but who also regretted the pain his heroin trade had inflicted on the community. However, following his release from prison and his subsequent cooperation with law enforcement, Lucas's image began to shift. He was no longer just a drug kingpin. He was now seen as a man who had helped take down corrupt cops and dismantle parts of the drug trade. Frank Lucas died on May 30th, 2019, at the age of 88 in Cedar Grove, New Jersey. By the time of his death, Lucas had largely faded from the public eye, living quietly in his final years. However, his death sparked renewed interest in his life and legacy, with obituaries and retrospectives offering differing perspectives on the man who had once dominated the heroin trade in Harlem. Lucas's legacy is a complicated one. On one hand, he was a ruthless criminal who built an empire on the back of the heroin epidemic, contributing to the suffering of countless individuals and families. Lucas will always be remembered as a man who destroyed lives in pursuit of wealth and power. Ultimately, Frank Lucas's story is one of contradictions. He was a man shaped by hardship, driven by a desire for success at any cost. Frank Lucas's life is a testament to the allure of power and the consequences of seeking it through criminal means. His rise from poverty in North Carolina to becoming one of the most powerful drug lords in New York City is a story of ambition, strategy, and ruthlessness. Lucas's decision to cooperate with law enforcement added an unexpected twist to his story, allowing him to escape the full consequences of his actions.